One of the things I think a lot of us have always been curious about is work. What is work? How does work relate to us? Work is so centralized in the North American context to who we are. Our identities are fashioned by work. What we do is kind of our sort of card that we give to people when we first introduce ourselves. But how important is that? And it's really a changing landscape right now. Personally, I think for me, work has never been the center of my world. I think work is an enabler for me to actually be true to who I am and what I am. But for a lot of people, work is who they are. Genuinely, people enjoy work. Right now we're in a space where work is changing, right? AI has come in, it's come in all aspects of our lives, and it's shifting everything around us. It's making everything seem all the more impossible in some ways, and in other ways, all the more possible, right? Work has now got AI so embedded into it that even when you're looking for work, you are now going to encounter AI in that realm as well. One of the things I was very curious to talk to my friend Aziza about is exactly this. I think, careers, work, all of this, how is technology changing this? How is technology shifting this? What can we do? How can we do it? And why it's really important for us to really focus on ourselves first and our communities first before we start focusing on these roles and on these jobs. So this episode is really all about work, all about careers. And I'm really lucky to have Aziza come and chat with us about this. Aziza has years of experience around this, has also experienced a lot of this, went through a career pivot themselves, and also more than anything is now on a new career pivot where they're also beginning to work within the career space in a new way. So all of this together should hopefully provide a really insightful conversation for people. I really hope that people get a lot of value and understanding and feel seen through this conversation. So enjoy this one. I really did. And yeah, look out for more. Hey, Aziza.
Hi, how are
How
you?
are I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me.
Thank you for
Delight and
doing this.
honor to be here. Yeah.
Oh, touched.
Really
I
is.
feel like you when we met, I felt very, very much like everything we were talking about felt so now. And there were so many other things that I was kind of grappling with too in a weird way. I always thought about the fact that, things are happening in life in themes around me a lot of the times. And so that was one of
Mhm.
the big themes at that point in time too. And it's still a theme today. And so I think it's something that we can actually share, hopefully, with everyone, and everyone can also get some insight and perspective on this. And just so that it doesn't seem so abstract, the theme we're talking about really is careers, and like our life around careers and what work is
Yeah.
for us and how work is changing, right? And
Yeah.
how we also need to change, I think, at the same time. So in terms of what it is that you do, I don't think my audience knows this at all. But what would be really nice is to get a little bit of insight into who you are, how you got started in what it is
Yeah.
you're doing, and what you're currently focusing on at the moment.
Okay. Sure. I'll start. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm Aziza Birani. I work currently as a career advisor with
Mm-hmm.
graduate students in technology at the University of Toronto. So I'm working with master's folks who are moving into like data science and UX and
Mm-hmm.
information systems design and all areas of sort of information management.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I think the world of career development is so interesting, especially right now where everything is
Yeah.
being defined and redefined, a little bit chaotic, etc. But there's still
Mm-hmm.
some things that are fairly commonplace and I think things that'll
Mm-hmm.
never change. So we can certainly get into that. But coming back to your question about where I am now and how I got here. So I have worked in education for many, many years. I've been at U of T for about 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved into career development about 6 years ago. And, and I think what drew me to careers work specifically is that our work lives inform so much of our entire lives. It's such a big
Mm-hmm.
part of who we
Yeah.
are, how we identify ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
how we move in the world, how we build the lives that we want. And so I
Yeah.
was really curious to understand what that journey is for people. And
Hmm.
I think that curiosity came from a place of like ultimate struggle. Like I
Yeah.
I was so lost in my own career for so many years and I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go or like I
Yeah.
felt like there were so many closed doors in front of me and so I just
Mm.
wanted to be on the other side of that to understand okay, how do
Right.
these doors open? How can people
Yeah.
facilitate their own um pathways and journeys
Yeah.
and all the wonder that goes into that. So yeah, that's what brought me to this conversation with you, actually. Yeah.
No, it's very, very interesting and very, like it really shows you just how overlapping the world actually is. Like I work primarily, I lead a UX design team,
Hmm.
and that is my day to day, right? Like, and I think like just working in that space alone and seeing people come in from very different career backgrounds prior, like, maybe you were not a UX designer to begin with, but maybe there's a career pivot. And even this idea of having a career pivot is something that I feel like people were very afraid to do in a previous generation, but it's so
Hmm.
common now, right?
Hmm.
I also think this idea to feeling very much like you are lost in your career and trying to figure that out is something that I think a lot of people have a big struggle with because I think
Hmm.
we are very patterned to believe that the singular career you sort of studied and trained towards is
Yeah.
your end state. That is the only thing
Hmm.
you'll ever do, right? But the reality, what we are actually out in the world, is that unfortunately, like things change, and that dynamic forces you to change. And I think that eventually becomes something that's a little bit more fortunate for you because you actually become truer to yourself
Hmm.
when you start examining a lot of that, you know. So I think that that part is really something that is really a common thing as well. I also really like that you talked a little bit about centering your career as in terms of your identity. Especially in North America, we really attribute our identity to our careers. Like I think it
Hmm.
drives a lot of who we are, and we build up a lot of our lives around that job, right? And I was recently reading something about the fact that, oh, is it time for us to like decenter career from our lives?
100%. Yes.
Yeah, and detach
Yeah.
those two things so that you actually
Hmm.
understand that I, as an individual, am not defined solely by what I do, right? Because what I do is so dynamic too now because your career is constantly going to change. But we can talk a little bit about that and a couple of other things that I have in mind for you, and so one of the first things I was really curious to hear from you really is that, you've worked directly on a day-to-day basis with people who are kind of entering the career, they're entering the workforce for the first time, or they're building a career path towards a new career altogether. What are some things that you see as current trends or, new shifts that you're seeing in terms of how people are doing this?
Mm. I think the trend question is an interesting one,
Yeah.
and I think so that there's a few things that I'm seeing, and then there's a few
Mm.
things that I think none of us are seeing. So that's
Yeah.
that's that's like an interesting point. But
Hmm. Hmm.
um, okay, so in terms of how people are entering the workforce from an early career perspective, I think generally that the the visibility component of career development is really crucial
Hmm.
in early career context. You need to make yourself be seen in the labor market.
Right.
And so and I think that's a trend that has actually always I don't know if it's a trend so much as it's a constant in
Hmm.
the development of
Hmm.
a career or like a professional journey that you
Hmm.
do want to make yourself um, visible to the people who are potentially going to hire
Hmm.
you or you're potentially going to work with. It's just that
Right.
the visibility tactics have changed a bit. They've
Hmm.
they've moved a little bit more online. So
Yeah.
I think, for instance, having like a really strong LinkedIn profile is so crucial. You can
Yeah.
think of like
Yeah.
LinkedIn as a bit of a landing page for
Hmm.
you, not just an online resume, for instance.
Hmm.
Um, I think having conversations with people who are doing the work that you want to do, actually at any
Right.
stage of your career, is really crucial
Right.
because that's where you get the insights and the stories.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
the actual lived experiences, the stories of how
Hmm.
people are managing and doing, and what were their challenges or how did they get to
Hmm.
where they're going.
Hmm.
And I think there are some elements that remain totally crucial, like really strong cover letter, really strong resume will always be a baseline, I believe,
Hmm.
for the most part, unless some of
Yeah.
those documents are not necessary. But by and large, people, at least in a Canadian context, they really
Yeah.
still are looking for those documents. In other
You're right.
contexts, not so much. But here, yeah, people are still relying on that
On
resume,
that.
those cover letters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Let me see. What else can I think about? Like when I think about the people that I work with, the folks who are most successful at opening doors for themselves professionally are those who are making themselves quite visible through
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn, maybe through an online portfolio, or having
Mm-hmm.
conversations consistently at different levels of the labor market. So they might be talking to hiring managers and they might be
Mm-hmm.
talking to folks who are doing the work that they want to do. And then they also might be having
Right.
conversations with people who are adjacent to where they want to head. So if they're looking for
Mm-hmm.
UX, maybe they're talking to
Yeah.
folks in product, maybe they're talking
Right.
to folks in UI or in other areas. And then I think something that they do quite seamlessly is ask for help.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so they're reaching out, they're coming to
Mm-hmm.
me and asking for insight, but they're also going to their
Mm-hmm.
friends, and they're also going to the
Mm-hmm.
friends of their friends, and they might
Right.
also be having conversations with their families or other
Mm-hmm.
contacts. So there's not a hesitation there. There's like a
Mm-hmm.
very intentional approach, which is I would like to move in this direction. Do you have something of value that can help me get there?
To get there.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so and that might sound a little bit transactional,
Yeah.
um, right? But
Yeah.
I think when I see these folks in motion, what I'm also seeing is that there's a generosity in how they're also offering their own time to other people.
Exactly.
So there's an exchange there. There's an exchange. It's
Yeah.
not an isolated journey that they're taking on their own and it feels so heavy and it's such a burden. They're
Yeah.
actually in
Yeah.
community with the
Yeah.
the 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 people around them, and they're in relationship with the path that they're
The people.
building.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Like one of the things I think that's really interesting there is that it is I think people are literally looking for that. And I think that, you use the term
yeah.
transaction, but I feel like there is no way around it being transactional, right? At the end of the day,
Mm,
you need to be able to source a lot of what it is that it's going to take for you to make that move. One of the things I did a couple that I still do and still doing right now is, I mentor at Innis with a
right,
lot of the students. And
right.
so I typically come in and it's a lot of people who are really at the cusp of graduating or maybe a
Mm,
year away from graduating.
mm,
But they're always very curious about like, what is this role going to look like for me?
mm,
And despite everything maybe they've seen, like maybe they watched a YouTube video where, a designer described the role for them or a product manager described the role of what it takes to be a product manager. I think they still value, a more direct insight from a real
totally.
person, right? So, actually going to someone with that degree of separation, maybe in this case, the degree of separation is our university residence.
Mm,
But just having that proximity is really more assuring to them than actually like something that maybe they've researched, right? So I think you need that combination of validation to understand that this is the path forward for me or that it's feasible. Other thing I really
yeah.
like the fact that you've described a little bit about the fact that networking and community is still a key part of it,
Hmm.
because there is no way around it. I don't think that there is any way to do this without knowing people.
No, I
Um,
don't think so. And I think
yeah.
that like it's funny because we're seeing the rise of so much tech, so much
Hmm.
AI, so much tech,
Mm,
so many
mm,
tools
hmm.
that we can use for our career development. But at the
Hmm.
end of the day, we
Yeah.
all want stories. We all want
Correct.
connection. And
Absolutely.
that is just a part of who we are as how we're made up
Hmm.
as humans, who we are as humans. Like
100%.
we right, we thrive in
Hmm.
context of stories. Stories allow us to find
Mm.
belonging. They
Yep.
allow us to see things in like a fashion in a linear way that actually allows our brain to absorb information.
Hmm.
We're not built on absorbing things through discrete facts,
No.
actually.
Nope. 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 No,
So
we aren't.
this conversation about AI kind of overtaking the workplace and us being sort of slaves to technology, I
Mm,
really I don't think will I think our nature as human beings will not
mhm.
necessarily allow for that to happen essentially.
100%.
No?
And
Yeah.
two things you've touched on really pivotal there is that this idea of a narrative is really what drives everything that we do. And I think that we're just not aware that there are narratives around us in all contexts, whether it's our careers, whether it's us existing outside in political spectrum, whatever it is, narratives drive a lot of what we do as humans. And I think that that's kind of how we process everything that's happening around us. I also think the fact that you've talked a little bit about the human connection and the human understanding is pivotal to all of this is really key. Like you can look at like what happened, for example, just last week with Klarna, which is a company that basically let go of all of its workforce in the beginning and said, "Oh, we're going to become very AI focused, and so therefore we don't need all these people."
Mhm.
And now, almost a month and a half later, they're rehiring everyone back
Yeah.
because they actually discovered that AI cannot necessarily do everything the way that a human could perform, on a day-to-day basis, but also at the same time that human element is still needed. And
Mhm.
AI is just a tool. Realistically, that's what it is. It's a tool, right? It's not a replacement. So I think that there are a lot of ideas around what people think that they can do with some of this
Mm.
technology, but the reality is it's still very, very early for them to even begin to think of such drastic shift, right? And so that's really fascinating to me. It's really, really fascinating to me. Speaking of AI, I know that this is something that you probably hear every day,
Yeah.
all day, every hour of every day. I feel like I can't,
Not allowed
I can't look anywhere without that
without
word
it.
being there. Yeah, and one of the things I was actually very curious, and I think we talked a little bit about this when we met is, how does this actually impact the career space, and have you actually noticed in any ways that it's maybe enhancing the job search or actually making the job search worse? And
Mhm.
what impact is it even having on career prospects?
Mhm. Okay, so I'm seeing AI at both sort of macro and micro levels.
Mm,
I think micro level, there's a lot of tools that students use
mm,
to help them with the job search, right? So
yeah.
we have people pushing their resumes through
Hmm.
ChatGPT and
Hmm.
allowing ChatGPT to find better ways of phrasing things on a
Hmm.
resume, which can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Especially if English is not your first language and you're having to
Exactly.
apply for co-ops and jobs in Canada, that's tremendously intimidating. That's so scary.
That's
So
hard.
to have
That's
like
really
a
hard.
it's really hard. So to have
Yeah.
like kind of like a thought partner in the form of generative
Hmm.
AI to help you through, I
Mm,
think that has been a bit reassuring for international students or even newcomers
yeah.
in Canada or in Toronto,
Hmm.
in Canada, I would say. Um, and then there's all these interesting and actually frankly fascinating tools that I'm seeing. Like,
Hmm.
for example, there's this tool called TextBlaze. And
Hmm.
TextBlaze is kind of it's a browser tool that'll allow you to um, basically record or store messaging or let's say like a resume blurb or
Hmm.
a message to a recruiter in the
Hmm.
platform or in the
Hmm.
tool and then create a keyboard shortcut for that
Right.
for that
Right.
message. And anytime you're using that message in LinkedIn or in Outlook or in
Hmm.
Gmail or whatever, you can just simply type your keyboard shortcut and your
Right.
whole message will appear. So it can like
Right.
really speed up your networking process
Working.
in certain
Hmm.
ways.
Hmm.
So that's interesting too.
Yeah.
Um, but then there's the flip side, of course,
Yeah.
which is like and for this one, actually, I have to speak about this because I thought it was very interesting. So
Hmm.
I went to a conference 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago.
Hmm.
It was an education conference. It's called
Yeah.
CEWL, Cooperative
Yeah.
Education Work Integrated Learning, and it was in Hamilton. And we went to a session by Professor Kate J. Cassidy, who is out at Brock University.
Hmm.
And so this professor had interviewed 21 employees. I believe they're probably
Hmm.
student co-op, like co-op students in the
Hmm.
workplace or early
Hmm.
career folks who were early adopters of generative AI. So essentially they were using ChatGPT in the workplace.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was she had measured the adoption of ChatGPT
Mm-hmm.
against three core, like, um, n- sort of psychological nutrients that we need as human beings to
Mm-hmm.
flourish.
Right.
So the first one was competence. That we
Mm-hmm.
need to feel a sense of contribution and competence in the way that
Mm-hmm.
we work.
Mm-hmm.
The second is connection or relatedness, that we need to feel connected to other people, connected to the work for us to be able to kind of thrive and flourish in that context. And the third is autonomy, where
Mm-hmm.
we do need to feel as though we do have freedom of choice. And even if the choice is bad,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
we need to feel that
Yep.
we had agency and ownership over that decision.
Yeah.
So when she measured the use of generative AI against these three core psychological nutrients,
Mm-hmm.
what she found was that there's always this like fine line. That on
Mm-hmm.
the one hand, for example, on the one hand, in relation to competence, yes, ChatGPT speeds things up
Mm-hmm.
and things are more efficient, and
Mm-hmm.
we can maybe borrow from that efficiency
Mm-hmm.
and feel as though we're moving through our work quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, that whole process around meaning making is lost.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
lost and in that we've probably lost the collaboration piece, because we're no longer
Exactly.
speaking to others to do our work.
Mm-hmm.
We're referencing a machine
Mm-hmm.
to help us
Yeah.
through these obstacles or these processes.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that was so interesting. This whole study really just, um, I think it captured how the use of generative AI kind of
Mm-hmm.
dilutes over time. It dilutes what it means to be human.
Yeah.
Unless we're
Definitely.
intentional about it, this is the kind of the effect,
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly. I think it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense to me because one of the things it's very fascinating that you're bringing this up because you know I encourage a lot of my team to maybe use on a day-to-day basis every AI tool that they possibly have access to. But the idea really is that they should engage with it because this is now sort of like a workplace requirement. But
Mm,
the idea of being intentional in your use is all the more paramount. So one of
mm,
the things I'll get them to do in the beginning is just kind of go out and explore and see how much they actually throw at the tool, and then they'll
yeah.
come back with a bunch of results. But then when we scrutinize the results and I'll ask questions about it, that's when they begin to like look at it a little bit more critically and wonder, oh, this may not necessarily be the right response, but I've been
Mm,
deluded almost into thinking that this is the right answer because it came with this sense of veracity from this tool. And so
right.
now I'm like, oh, no, this is actually truth. But in reality, if you look at it more critically, it's like, this is not truth, right? And so that idea of
Mm,
finding that meaning and that understanding
mhm,
is not something that we are ready to do because with this tool, we're assuming this tool is doing that for us or on our behalf, right? And that is
totally.
definitely not the case, right?
Mhm,
The thing too is that I also keep referencing the fact that anyone can prompt a tool, but you will never all get the same result. So you could prompt it exactly the same thing.
mhm,
You're all going to get a variety of results, right? The
mhm,
thing is that context is everything. That's the power of AI is context. And if AI does not have the right context, it's not necessarily going to provide you with an accurate result. And strangely, building that context comes from a lot of this finding of its meaning, which is still the human part of the entire experience. So you have to be
mhm,
the one to still process all of these answers to say, this is still correct, this makes sense, this is still relevant to
totally.
this, and then give it back to the AI and say, okay, this is actually how the problem should be pieced together. Now,
Mhm,
can you give me an output that actually maybe is speeding up the workflow? I also think it's more a tool to give you help with that menial sort of um, task based work that we did in the past and allowing you to be more cerebral in how you're approaching your work. So you come
mm,
in with the mindset. This is just going to do all the little nitty gritty bits of it for you to kind of speed up that thought process for you. It's not like you're
mhm,
just devoid of thought and the entire thought process is just like laden on the tool. And I think that it's really fascinating you say that that's how, a lot of people are applying AI right now. Because I find it's also going to be a little bit detrimental to start off in that way, right? Because if
mm,
you are just going off and you're just using it in this way, you're training yourself to think that this is what it's going to do for you, right? And then when it doesn't, when it fails you, then you just give up on it. And then either it's a form of resistance to use it in the future, or you're just like, I don't know, like I feel helpless without it. But I think that if you go at it with the mindset of like, it's a learning, it's a tool that's still developing because every day it's growing, and I'm developing with it, then I think you have a little bit more of a chance of saying, this is going to become a part of my life in a more meaningful manner, the more I give myself the space to give meaning to things, right? If I'm learning and I'm still applying my human element to it, it will learn with me. It's kind of like the
Mhm.
approach that I think would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, I liked what you said about um having a conversation about the output
Hmm.
of of generative
Yeah,
AI, which is
yeah,
so interesting to me because I think that's an evolution of how to manage
hmm,
working with AI,
hmm,
right? So now it's like a conversation about the output. It's a collaborative look at, is this
yeah,
accurate? Is this what we want to say?
yeah,
Or do
yeah,
we want something different? And I think
yeah,
that points to a little bit like the kind of skill building that we're going to need moving forward, which
hmm,
is I think heavily going to be about, in my mind, collaboration,
hmm,
but collaboration in the context of also using these tools.
correct.
Not using them in isolation, I suppose,
Yeah,
but like coming together and figuring out, okay, like how do we want this output to look, and what are
yeah,
the frameworks around this output? Like what are the
hmm,
policies and the
hmm.
uses around how, yeah, I think it's very interesting. Yeah.
I think one of the things that you well, like would be really good for a lot of people to it's I think in many ways it's something that a lot of it's a lesson that's existed forever, and it's always to scrutinize what you take as truth. And I don't think anything can be considered as truth unless it's actually not it's able to withstand scrutiny, right? Like you should be able to like ask as many questions about what you're receiving and
Mhm.
be able to say it's answering all those questions correctly,
Mhm.
and none of those questions are actually tearing down any element of what it's produced. Then you can say, okay, this could be a truth, right? And so that means you still have to go externally and look at where its source this information may be from, and kind of like examine what that actually means, or you're looking at how it's actually structuring that response for you. The one thing I think that's really interesting is that we a lot of it's all everything is data based, but you don't take data as truth without actually testing that data. And
Totally.
so the same thing should apply here, right? Like you cannot, if the output is what you're getting, you need to test that output. You cannot just assume that this is like like a given truth to the entire situation. A lot of companies need to build that element into their workflows. I think that would be the key state to kind of shift the direction of what you're going to produce as an output.
And that, to me, that's a lot of food for thought, because
Hmm.
what that means is then that yes, these tools are fast and they're efficient,
Yeah.
but we also need to build time around like
Hmm.
how we're interpreting that efficiency,
Yeah.
right? So it's not we're
Yeah.
not I don't know that we're necessarily saving time at the end of the day then.
No,
We might
no.
be a
I
little
mean,
bit,
in some ways
but
you aren't, right? Like
yeah.
the thing that I think that's really interesting about it is no one you can get training on AI right now. Somebody can come
Mhm.
and tell you go to like a Coursera or take a course here to do something around training, getting familiar with AI. But the validity of that information, it will change in a matter of weeks because in the
Mhm.
next iteration of
Mhm.
AI in 2 weeks from now, everything that you could have learned is again not applicable, right?
Yeah.
But I think at the same time, we are just being thrust into this need for AI without any kind of
Yes.
training, without any kind of insight. So the learning curve is already pretty steep when you think about it, because maybe if you didn't have a technical background, this is going to seem so outlandish and over the top to you. And then what you're getting as an answer, you're also not being trained to think is wrong, right?
Mhm.
You're always just being trained to think, or you're being told to think rather, that this is true information. Like everything it's giving you is correct. It's like past all these benchmark tests, it's actually accurate. That's definitely not the case. And I think anyone in tech who has built tech before would say that you cannot just say the first answer is the right answer all the time. Like you really need to put it through some sort of like a gauntlet so that it can give you exactly what it is you need, you know? And I think
Hmm.
even from a career standpoint, like, even if you are I personally feel if you're thinking about going into this space, don't lose sight of the fact that maybe you need to be scrutinizing of these tools, right? Of what it is you use and how you use it. And remember to keep that human element of you. One of the things I had an intern recently at work, and one of the things I told her is that when you leave here, I know you use AI maybe to generate the majority of your final presentation. It's a given. But I told her, I was like, the reality is that what people will hire for, I think, in the future is you. It has a lot to do
Hmm.
with how you think, what you can do, and the
Hmm.
insight that you're offering, that perspective, right? And that critical nature that maybe you have. The tools are going to be available to everyone. That's leveling out the playing field in many ways because you all have access to exactly the same tools, right?
Hmm.
But it's really who you are and what you are doing, how you think, and then you're going to
Hmm.
apply those tools to that thought process that I think is going to determine what people will see in you as an employee because that's the uniqueness now you're bringing to this thing. And she
That
seemed
makes
really
so much
surprised by
sense.
the fact that like she was like, yeah, and I was like, yes. I was like, you and like every other designer here had exactly the same tools. You could have all produced the same presentation if
Yeah.
you really wanted to, but it's how you went about it, right? Like it's like what your thinking was about those outputs, how you processed those outputs, what you did with those outputs. That I think makes it truly you, and I think that that's where you begin to really build that personal brand as an employee for me at least. Mm.
Which makes so much sense because that's
Yeah.
exactly right in my mind. Like we, I think we're as humans, we're always curious about how people think and how they
Mhm.
work and the process
Mhm.
behind their motivations and their actions, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what's the story again? Like what is that story?
Exactly. What
And
is
it
the story?
applies what's the story? And it applies in the career space 100%. So I completely
Absolutely.
agree. I think that like we're
Absolutely.
going to need to focus more on um like how we're thinking about things and really articulate
Mhm.
that well going forward.
Yep. Yep.
I think we're going to need to be a lot more intentional about how we're collaborating with each other and
Mhm.
how we're building those relational skills with each other going forward. That's, I think, another
Yeah.
skill that I see moving that just seems so paramount.
Yeah.
Um, I think we're going to have to continue to learn how to be more flexible and adaptable
Mhm.
because things are changing so fast. But like
So fast.
underneath all the change, there's these core things that you and I are
Mhm.
talking about right now that I don't think
Mhm.
will change.
Yeah.
We still want the story, we still want the thinking, we'll still want the approach,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
how, that'll remain
Mhm.
constant. So
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
I absolutely
Yeah.
agree, and I think those are some really helpful tips because I feel like that was also kind of sort of maybe even the segue into the next part of this was really what are some
Mm.
helpful pieces of advice. But I think that is probably the most useful advice that a lot of people are going to get right now is the fact that yes, it is you, it is your story, it is what
Mhm.
you do, how you do these things. That's that's going to be the case. And I think also for people to remember that at the end of the day, you are not hired by a machine. You are still hired by a human, and you're
Mhm.
likely going to be working for another human.
Mhm.
And I think that at the end of the day should maybe be a little bit of a solace in the sense that you know you're not going to go into a space where work is going to be mandated to you by something other than another human. So that expectation of just being and presenting in a more machine-like manner, I don't think that needs to exist. I think people need to really keep their humanity and bring that humanity forward first, more than
Yeah.
anything.
And
Yeah.
I feel like when I think leaning into your own uniqueness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
your own strengths and skills, that is the key and the antidote.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's both. It's
Yeah.
both the foil and the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, I think that with the students that I work with, the folks who kind of who sort of struggle the most
Mm-hmm.
with building forward is when they're trying to mold who they are to a certain form or template or idea of
Yeah.
what it means to be X,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
But on the flip side, the folks
Mm-hmm.
who are able to open those doors for themselves, even if they're just like mental
Mm-hmm.
doors,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's very much about who they are, what they believe, what's important to them,
Yes.
what their values are, and
Yeah.
and they're able to um, bring all of these elements of themselves through and funnel that through curiosity and vulnerability,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A- and that takes a bit of, I think, introspection and practice.
Mm.
But once I feel like people are on that track of
Yeah.
being curious and being vulnerable and being just saying like, hey, like this is where I'm at. Like, what are your thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
or what do you think, or what
Yeah.
are your suggestions? Then I think a lot more things open up. So, if any of your audience members are in the throes of a job search, that's what I
Mm-hmm.
would recommend. Like leading with curiosity, leading with vulnerability, everything
Yeah.
else will fall into place. But I
Yeah.
think those two things are really nice out of many. Those two things can be starting points. There's so many, but
Yeah.
starting points for forward movement. Yeah.
I think that that's really, really great to hear because I think a lot of people lose sight of that fact, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think one of the things that people will see more and more is like, when you're feeling lost and you're feeling like,
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is, and you'll go online somewhere
Yeah.
and you'll watch a video and someone will say, okay, this is how you should structure your presentation or your resume or whatever else. You assume that, okay, this is what got them the job, therefore I need to kind of do the same thing, right? But at the end of the day, like all of you are then basically the same resume throughout, right? There is no uniqueness to what it is. And that makes it really difficult then for someone to go in and say, what is distinct, right? And the only way that they
Mhm.
discover what's distinct is obviously through the interview process, maybe.
Mhm.
But I think from the get go, if you came in with a very unique perspective, I feel like that already stands out in so many ways.
Mhm.
One of the things I actually was going to very ask you, and I was very tempted to ask you as well, is like there is a sense of when you are on a job search, for example, this lack of motivation because
Yeah.
maybe like at one point, you look at like how many LinkedIn easy applies you did, and you're just like, oh my god, it's like 625 or whatever, like
Yeah. Yeah.
absurd number it is,
Sure.
right? And you look
Demoralizing.
at that, yeah, and then it's so demoralizing, right? Do you
It's
have
so
any
demoralizing.
recommendations or tips
Yeah.
for how to deal with that scenario and what
Yeah, I
should
have
we
so
actually
many.
be doing?
I have so
Good.
many.
Okay, good. This is good.
So this is so often a challenge
Yeah.
for so many
Yeah.
of the students that I work with, and even the other folks that I'm having conversations with around careers. Okay, so um yeah, mm, I really think, okay, tips around how to navigate
Mm-hmm.
motivation or lack thereof in the in the job
Mm-hmm.
search. Because I have so many, I have to think about what's the most effective. So, so
pick your like top three or top five.
I just, I often feel like a structured approach works very
Mm-hmm.
well with a job
Mm.
search.
Yeah.
So there's a few things that I advocate for. The first is a wellness strategy with your job search. Make sure that you have
Mm-hmm.
a morning routine that works for you,
Mm-hmm.
that allows you to connect with who you are and what you're
Mm-hmm.
like outside of the search, who you are, what are you
Mm.
about, where are you going, what do you find interesting, fascinating, passionate, like what drives you, kind of
Yeah.
connect to you. And if you
Yeah.
can find points of connection to yourself again throughout the day, that's helpful, in the
Mm-hmm.
morning, at lunch, in the evening. So that can be a standard. um um A layered approach to a job search is helpful. At your
Mm-hmm.
baseline, making sure that you have strong cover letter and resume documents and visibility strategies in terms of, let's say, LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
That is your baseline. So you can continue to
Yeah.
use that to apply for roles that you find that you think are interesting when you're applying for
Mm-hmm.
those positions. You need a bit of, put some blinders
Mm-hmm.
on. It's just you and the role. Everyone
Yeah.
else can fade away. You know, those
Exactly.
LinkedIn Easy Apply numbers, that's fine. Let them fade. It's just you in the role. Do your best. Be authentic with your documents and just put them out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And then something else that can really lift people out of the isolation and the monotony that is the search
Mm-hmm.
is community. And so if you can find a way, if folks can find a
Mm-hmm.
way to connect with
Mm-hmm.
community, either in the form of one-on-one coffee chats or going to events. They don't necessarily have to be networking events. It could be like
Mm-hmm.
meetups or communities of practice
Mm-hmm.
around a certain topic or theme. But finding a way to connect to the area that you're moving into, either through
Yeah.
people or through
Yeah.
being in certain spaces, I recommend
Mm-hmm.
structuring that into the search so that you're not just
Mm-hmm.
it's not just you and the screen, because that is the
Yeah.
worst kind of method. That's like just the worst. um but it gets tough out there, so like I do recommend, if it's been months and you're searching and
Mm-hmm.
searching, like if you can get any kind of a small part-time job to help you along,
Mm-hmm.
just so that even if it doesn't matter what it is, it's a coffee shop,
Yeah.
it's XYZ, just to get you out there and connecting and
Yeah.
in the flow of life again.
Life. Mm.
That I certainly recommend that.
Yeah.
um Let me see here. There's all there's all kinds of other suggestions that you'll see out there
Yeah.
for like tools and tech
Mm-hmm.
and all that kind of thing. But I think a job search doesn't have to be so complex.
Yeah.
You can have your wellness, you can have your actual application layer, and then you
Yeah.
have your connection layer, and those
Correct.
three can fluctuate throughout the course of a week or for a day or
Mm-hmm.
etc. I think something else that is an interesting thing to think about in relation to a job search is really being clear on your needs as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a bit of work, but like
Yeah.
for instance, I know that my needs, my top needs are personal connection and emotion, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
personal growth and emotional connection. So it's no
Mm-hmm.
surprise that I
Yeah.
work in a position that
And what
allows
you
me
do.
to connect so deeply with people, right? And also that I'm having this conversation with you, which is very much about
Exactly.
personal growth and like careers and all of that. And so if you could understand for yourself, what are
Mm-hmm.
your drivers? What is
Mm-hmm.
it that you are intrinsically drawn to and why,
Mm-hmm.
then that'll be easier for you to kind of shape your life around and your
Yeah.
strategy around, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.